Good afternoon. My name is Heidi Erb, and I'm the Community Relations Director at the National Registry of EMTs, and I thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon so that you can learn a little more about the Massachusetts transition to national certification. A few things to get started as far as WebEkit for the day. We have muted all of the lines so that everyone will be able to hear me clearly, and also for the recording. We will be announcing after this session, probably the next few days, where you can play this video back and the information. The session is going to present a lot of information about this transition. I hope you will hang in there with me while I go through all the steps, and I've tried to make it as logical as I could, and we'll move through it kind of quickly in some areas, but I think the others will take some time and talk about them. So let's get started. The very important thing I want to start out with mentioning is it is very important that the providers create their account on the proper website. We have two websites that are working together to work and manage the continuing education for Massachusetts EMS providers. You should only have an account on one of the websites, with the exception of if you are a training officer for an EMS agency and you do not hold national EMS certification. If you've never had it, you're not reinstating it, then you would have an account on both NREMT.org and massemt.org. We'll review that in just a moment in more detail. So NREMT.org is the main website, and that is the website being used for all new providers who are testing to become Massachusetts licensed or certified. Anyone who held national certification prior to July 1st of 2013, if they chose to do that on their own, they have an account on nremt.org. And then there are providers who held national certification in the past, had it lapse, are certified with Massachusetts at the same level. They have the opportunity and basically the requirement to reinstate their national certification if it is at the same level, so that they are also currently nationally certified. All EMS providers must do the Mark King Initiative, or you'll hear us talk about MKI, to reinstate their national certification if they are eligible to do so. An example when you would not do this is if you had national EMS certification as an EMT, you went on to become a paramedic in Massachusetts, and you've never had national certification as a paramedic, then you would not be able to reinstate because the levels are different. As part of this new process, Massachusetts guidelines and rules are going to be changing so that providers must obtain and maintain national certification as part of their licensure process if they entered the system after July 1st. There are providers in Massachusetts that are using the massemt.org website who have never held national EMS certification at their current level or any level, so they're using that website. But anyone new coming into the system will be obtaining and maintaining national EMS certification. There is a great resource available to you, and if you've not taken the time to read it, I would highly recommend that you do. It is the Provider's Guidebook put out by the Massachusetts OEMS. The website link is on the page, but if you go to the Massachusetts homepage, it's on the right-hand side, and it will walk you through all of the transition things that are taking place with the adoption of national EMS certification and the adoption of the national EMS standards in Massachusetts. So let's get started. Let's talk about creating that account and how that process works. This is the home page for the National Registry of EMTs. You can see on the left-hand side there is a link that says Create New Account. You will create your own username and password on this website. Hopefully that will help you remember what it is more frequently. We do have an automated system available to assist you if need be. As you're creating your account, we ask that you select all the appropriate roles. If you're reinstating under the National Mark King Initiative, then you would do National Certified EMS Professional. If you're a training officer, please click that as well so that you have only one login to manage all of the rights you would be granted on the website. We do have security questions that we link to your username and password in case you need assistance in the future. You are attesting that you're making this account for your own use, that no one else is making the account on your behalf. The Massachusetts EMT.org website is very similar. Again, you'll see on the left-hand side, Create New Account. When completing your account and profile information on this page, you will also do your username and password, some personal information, but you will also be providing your Massachusetts EMS identification number. Again, you'll answer the security questions. When you return to your account, whether it's on massemt.org or NREMT, you will then be presented with the status of your account. Here it's going to ask you to affiliate with an agency. An agency, for the purposes of the continuing education, is where you work using your EMS skills. And this would be your primary place of employment, whether it's paid or volunteer, or your highest level of service. If you're a paramedic and your primary job is with a BLS unit, but you volunteer as a paramedic, I would recommend that you affiliate with the paramedic agency. We'll talk about that in detail again shortly. Let's talk about the Smart King Initiative, or the MKI. You will create that account on the NREMT.org website. You will log in and click on CBT Candidates once you've created your profile. Locate the tab that says Smart King Initiative in the center of the screen. Use the pull down to select the state of Massachusetts. There may be an occasion where you'll get a notice saying not eligible. If that is the case, please contact the National Registry or Massachusetts EMS for assistance. Prior to 2007, the National Registry entered all of the data in our system by reading paper applications. And I'm not sure how well you write legibly, but the papers that I saw through here when we were doing that were not necessarily the neatest handwriting. We are also matching two databases to double check that listing, and there may be an entry error in either one. We will work with you to get that corrected so that you will be eligible for the Smart King Initiative. As you complete the process, you will pay the current recertification fee, $15 for EMT and I-85, $20 for paramedic. If you had your National EMS certification prior to 1985, your results may not be in our active data file. If you try to do the Smart King Initiative, that may also be a stumbling block or just a small stepping stone we need to get over. Contact the National Registry for assistance. We will get your data re-imported into our active files so that you can complete the process. Once you have your account, I mentioned affiliating with your agency. This is the screenshot for the Massachusetts EMT.org website. You will click on Unaffiliated in the upper left-hand side, and the list of agencies that are currently enrolled will appear. Select your agency. If your agency is not listed, please ask your training officer to contact the National Registry for assistance. The training officer for each agency will validate that you are affiliated with their agency. While you're waiting for that approval, you may go ahead and begin logging your continuing education. Using the NREMT website, the steps are very similar, with adding the selection for your state. So let's talk a little more about affiliation. What if you're not affiliated with an EMS agency at this time? Well, the National Registry policy requires that you must be affiliated, but the Massachusetts rules and regulations does not require affiliation to maintain your certification or license. To accommodate this difference, we have established agencies titled unaffiliated region, and I placed an X in here, but it would be region 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. You will affiliate with that region, and at the current time, the Massachusetts Office of EMS will assist you with completing the process for continuing education and relicensure. I mentioned earlier, what if you work for more than one agency? Well, think of it this way. Who would you have sign a piece of paper saying that you work for their agency and that your skills are up to date? Pick that agency. Maybe it's your primary agency, or maybe it's your highest service level. All ALS level providers, so intermediates, advanced EMT, and paramedic, must have a medical director verified competency of skills. If your primary agency is not an ALS service, you'll want to affiliate with your secondary. Did you see the similarities between the websites? The headers may have been slightly different, but the flow of information and the arrangement of the information is the same. Let's talk a little bit about the National Continued Competency Program, or the new National Registry recertification process. This has been in development for over 3 years, and it included discussions with EMS community partners, state EMS officials, training officers, EMS providers, paid and volunteer, rural and metro. The concept was really built on 4 principles, similar to the American Board of Medical Specialties. Those principles are maintenance of professional standing, that you are eligible to have a license or certification, the cognitive competency, that you know what you're doing to be that type of provider. If you tell someone in the public, I'm an EMT, they assume that your professional expectation is you know how to be an EMT. Practice performance. That's the competent delivery of care, and that's a local observation and a local attestation. Sitting at the National Registry offices in Ohio, I can't tell anyone else other than someone that I would observe, if I was qualified, if they are competent to deliver care. That's a local aspect of the job. And lifelong learning. That's a professional attribute. And by profession, I don't mean that you're necessarily paid. I mean that that is your commitment to the profession and to the act of being an EMS provider to continue to learn to provide the best care possible. So we take these 4 principles and we see that there are state, local, and individual elements to them, and we combine them and come up with 3 content areas related to continuing education. The first is the National Core Competencies. That's a cognitive competency. That's things like evidence-based medicine, changes in scope of practice, articles regarding proper EMS care, things that are low frequency and high criticality, and in the future it will include assessment results. The local portion are those things that are state and locally important to you in your area. It could be from your CQI or CQA information or your NEMSIS data if you collect that, or just a run review type of thing on what you need to improve on in your area. The individual portion is 25%, and that's what interests you in EMS. It promotes that lifelong learning. Again, in the future, it will also give you an option to take recommendations from the assessment guide. The National Core, when we launch it in 2016 is the projected date to launch this program nationally, will be developed by a national panel of experts. We expect about 21 people. Those core competencies will be set for 5 years, and that is similar to the American Heart Association guidelines and also falls in line with the National Registry Practice Analysis. The concept of having the national core also supports the implementation of the new scope of practice initiatives that are taking place nationwide. The NREMT will provide at no cost, via the use of subject matter experts, related supportive educational materials over the national core competencies. For the pilot, we've developed the educational guidelines for EMT and paramedic and source out more like a teaching plan. Those are available publicly, and we'll share them as appropriate. This new continued competency program is being pilot tested in 2 states, North Dakota and with you in Massachusetts. North Dakota has a long history with the National Registry for use at initial and recertification for over 20 years. And Massachusetts, being new to the National Registry, but had similar compliance issues and similar compliance habits about doing a state refresher and consolidated education. So we felt that it was a good match. For Massachusetts, during this transition period, for those that are due to have their license renewed in 2014 or 2015, we really have 3 tracks or 3 options for you to make this as easy as possible. You may choose to follow the National Continued Competency Program as it is currently outlined. That is 50% of the education would be those defined content and topics, 25% local, and 25% individual. You may also choose to use your Massachusetts refresher for those that are due in 2014 or 2015. You can apply that as your national, carry the balance to the local, and carry any leftover balance to the individual. And I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. The third option is to follow the traditional National Registry recertification plan, which is 72 hours every 2 years. You would do this by submitting a paper application because the online system is now targeted to the new continued competency plan for providers from agencies in Massachusetts. The goal of this transition is to be flexible and fair, and the National Registry along with Massachusetts EMS are working very closely to make this happen. For those candidates that are reinstating their national certification under the MKI and those using the Mass EMT website, the education dates that are available to you are January 1st, 2012 through March 31st, 2014 if your Massachusetts certification expires in 2014. If your expiration is in 2015, you have the dates of January 1st, 2013 through March 31st, 2015. This is slightly different than what you've had in the past in Massachusetts, where your dates ran for calendar years. Once everyone is into the system, everyone will follow the new dates of April 1st to March 31st. If you happen to be one of the nationally certified EMS providers who voluntarily held national certification and resided in Massachusetts, you will still follow the National Registry date brackets of April 1st to March 31st. So we talked about the hours being national, local, and individual. Let's look at the breakdown. For an EMR, it is 16 hours every 2 years. 8 hours national, 4 hours local, and 4 hours individual. EMT is a total of 40 hours, 20 national, 10 local, 10 individual. Paramedic is 60 hours, 30 national, 15 local, and 15 individual. The goal under the new continued competency plan is that if you focus education on concise topics, the value is more than if you had the same old sit in your chair, have the same old class over and over again. The topic areas for the National Continued Competency requirements mirror the categories or the topic areas in the practice analysis. They are airway, respiration and ventilation, cardiovascular, trauma, medical, and EMS operations. You'll notice, though, that the breakdown of hours by provider level is a little different, and that reflects the depth and breadth of knowledge for that provider. Here's an example of how you can see the difference. Both levels, EMT and paramedic, have 4 hours of ARV, but the hours within that category are different based on the knowledge. So where would you find this NCCR education? Well, you can get it at conferences. It would be through your Massachusetts approved locally offered courses and through distributive education. You'll find when you look at the content in the NCCR, you may have already received that education by doing something like your ACLS class or your PEP class or your PALS class. It's the content and the focus of the instruction that is the important thing. I mentioned the educational content, and where does that come from? Well, the National Registry developed educational materials or education guidelines related to the NCCR. They are PDF documents. They will be placed on the National Registry login for you after you log in and connect with your Massachusetts information. That'll be coming in the next week or so, and it'll also be on the Massachusetts EMS website. If you'd like, in the meantime, you can email me after this session, and I'd be glad to send them to you. The educational guides are about 100 pages apiece, but they give good resource information on the content that should be focused on. Well, what might that local piece look like to you? Remember, at the EMT level, that's 10 hours of your education, and at the paramedic, it's 15. The whole idea behind this grouping and this concept is that it is a local decision, and that decision can be made by your training officer or medical director, or maybe your agency executive. It could be a protocol update or reviews. It could be a state update that comes down. It could be topics or interventions based on your QI and QA findings. And it may also include some local specialty type content. If you're near a river or you're near the ocean and that may be the types of work you run into, you might practice that and use that education toward your LCCR. You may not have rattlesnake bites in Massachusetts like they might in the desert somewhere, so that might not be applicable to you. You may also use these hours for community or cultural awareness. So you've got your national and you have your local, but gosh, how do you figure out what your individual is? Well, for your first recertification cycle, we recommend that it's EMS-related content that interests you. Keep in mind that needs to be appropriate at your provider level. If your local agency has launched a new initiative and maybe they needed more than those 10 hours of local, they may ask you to use some of your personal or your individual hours to finish finish education related more on local elements. In the future, we will be developing an assessment guide as part of this process. And as you would submit your recertification, you would do an assessment, 100 question, in your computer, whether it's at the station or at home, and after that, you would get a results back recommending that maybe you focus on airway or cardiology or trauma or medical for your next recertification cycle. That information, blinded, will go back to your training officer to help them develop some of the local pieces to encourage improvement within the agency. You will submit your national EMS certification or your CE documentation electronically, with the exception of those selecting to do the 72-hour traditional NREMT for 2014 or 2015. That would still be on paper. The assessment guide will launch in October of 2014 as part of the process for those that are due in 2015. I believe I mentioned most of these. It will be an online assessment guide. It will help guide your future individual or your lifelong learning. It is not punitive, and it will cover EMS domain only, not EMS operations. An interesting side note on that is when we were having the focus groups and talking about how to provide resources back to the training officers and agencies and the state officials and the training officers all liked the idea of the assessment, but their first concern was that the providers wouldn't be happy having a test or assessment. When we had the providers come in, they were excited about it, and it caught me a little off guard, and they wanted to know if it would tell them, ooh, they better practice with this airway tool, or they need more help with 12-lead interpretation. Keep in mind that an unsecured 100-question assessment guide is not going to be that specific, but it certainly was good to know that the providers really wanted to use that to improve themselves in the way that they can care for their patients. The National Registry Board of Directors feels that National EMS certification and continuing education is a personal responsibility. But one of the things that we did learn during our discussions and planning all of this is there are a lot of agencies that as a job description for a training officer, it's their responsibility to make sure that all the providers get the education needed to maintain that certification. So the system now allows training officers that you're affiliated with, your single primary agency, and an EMS provider to document continuing education. So if your agency chooses to be proactive and to document all of your CE for you, you as the provider are still the one responsible to say, yes, I did all this education. It is verified by your training officer and medical director, but it is still you submitting at the very end to say, yep, this is what I did. So let's walk through how this whole process works and how you can enter CE. We've logged in. I used the Massachusetts site for this example. It was a little clearer to see because of the colors. You'll start by clicking on Manage Education. In this case, I started with Add a Class, and I checked National. I enter in the Massachusetts Refresher as my class name. Remember, that was option 2 when we talked about flexibility for the first 2 years. So under this, I've listed Massachusetts Refresher. I would list the course number, that it was a classroom lecture, and the date. Under Detail, you will see it says MA Approved Refresher Course. The other pieces that you see in the content are things that are listed in that National Continued Competency Requirements. By selecting the Massachusetts Refresher, the system will automatically give you the maximum hours for the national at your provider level, whether that's 30 hours for paramedic or 20 hours for an EMT. When you've submitted that to your bank of CE, it will show that section as being complete. In this example, this provider has also entered 6 hours of local education, so the bar is about halfway across. On the National Registry website, and I apologize, this screen's a little fuzzy, you will still see the Massachusetts Approved Refresher course, and those hours still drop in just like they did on the previous screen. I recommend that you be efficient with your continuing education. Everyone transitioning is going through this new process. Use that Massachusetts Refresher if you've already completed it to cover your national component. Apply any extra hours to your local or individual. Your Massachusetts Refresher is 48 hours. So for an EMT, that exceeds the maximum you need. And for a paramedic, then you need to document the additional 12 hours either under local or individual. So let's take a look on how you might enter under the National Continued Competency Requirements. So in this case, the name of the class was Airway Update, a description, NCCR Airway. It gives you the opportunity, highly recommended by the way, to add your course number, classroom lecture, and moving down to detail, what applied would be artificial ventilation, 2 hours, and click on Add. Keep in mind that one course could have more than one type of detail or sub-content in it, and you can add additional with that same name. Now the screen has changed, and this provider has 2 hours of the 30 hours required, 10 hours of their local, and they've not done any individual. Here's an example of how to enter a local course. Be sure to select the proper method of instruction, whether it was an in-service training or distributive education. Distributive education or distributive learning, as far as the National Registry description, is when the instructor and the student cannot interact at the same time. Participating in a webinar like we are today, where we can answer questions when it's appropriate to pause and answer them, that is a virtual instruction, and that is not distributive education. So keep that in mind as you're working through these descriptions. A couple special notes for the Mark King Initiative folks. All providers who are reinstating their national EMS certification receive an expiration date of 2016. If your Massachusetts license is due in 2014, you still need to document your continuing education, and we'll go over that in just a moment. But another thing that may come up is that your Massachusetts certification is in 2015 and your National Registry is now 2016. The OEMS will be contacting you with instructions on how to align that in the coming weeks. Watch for that information so that you can get those dates aligned and you're not having to keep track of doing things on opposite years. So here for the Mark King Initiative providers, your message is going to say that you're not due to recertify at this time. You need to ignore that box and go ahead and enter your continuing education. The National Registry will provide that data feed to the Massachusetts licensure system on your behalf once it is documented. We anticipate sending those feeds starting in the spring of the year through the end of the recertification cycle on March 31st. Do you have any continuing education credits in the Con Ed portal that Massachusetts has? You can go to that portal, log in and print out your information so that you can enter it in the National Registry for consistency. Unfortunately, we did not have the opportunity to provide an automatic transfer because matching names and databases and dates was going to be quite the challenge, and we wanted to make sure that you got the hours that you were entitled to. So we're asking you to do that. If you held National EMS certification prior to July 1st and you were using the online recertification process and had entered hours in education, those hours disappeared for a while. We apologize for the confusion or stress that may have caused. But now you'll have a link when you log in that says Port Hours. And that will give you the opportunity to look at those courses you had entered and assign them appropriately to either the national, the local, or the individual categories. When you have completed all of your continuing education hourly requirements, you will submit your electronic packet, for lack of a better term, to your training officer and medical director. The recertification application fee is due at the time of submission. And once you submit your records, the files are locked until the training officer and medical director approve or reject them. If they are rejected, the file is unlocked so that you can make changes. We would hope that the training officer would contact you and say, hey, I'm rejecting your recertification packet. I need proof you've done X, Y, or Z, or you've got the date wrong, or this is the wrong course number, something like that, that they would talk with you over that. And you'll resubmit your package to them. There is no additional fee for the resubmission steps. The application or submission fees vary depending on which screen you're using or which website. For those that hold National EMS certification, for EMT the fee is $15. For paramedic it's $20. For EMT on the massemt.org website it's $20 and paramedic is $25. You will hit Submit Recertification when you are logged into your screen, and that is on the left-hand side. Just a reminder again, those that are in the Mark King Initiative must have their continuing education hours entered by the deadline, but they do not hit submit. A few final thoughts about this whole process. First, I will be attending the Western Massachusetts EMS Conference starting on Friday with our Director of Results and Sales, Gabe Romero. We'll be there to answer as many questions as we can. We can enroll agencies. We can affiliate you with your agency there, walk you through that process. Anything that you may think of and you have a question, please stop by and ask us that. We'll be there and available as long as you need us to be. Watch for additional announcements. When you create your profile on the websites, we're asking you for an email address so that we can reach out to you and provide you with information that is important to your certification and licensure. So please watch for those. It will include an announcement on how to play back today's session. This is a new process for many, not just the National Registry certification and using that as the initial steps, but as far as the pilot process, we are here to help you. Our call center staff is available at 614-888-4484. You are also welcome to email me with questions and concerns as well. And my email address is Heidi, H-E-I-D-I, at NREMT.org. Communication and patience are very important while we all go through this together. If you are due in 2015, my suggestion is that you watch for lessons learned and tips after we get through this first few months with those that are due to recertify in 2014. I'm sure we'll work out a lot of new things and find processes and improvements to share with you, and we'll do that through communiques. But if you're not due till 2015, we would ask that you give us the opportunity to dedicate the time to those that are due in 2014 and have just a small window to get all of this done. The National Registry and the Massachusetts OEMS is dedicated to making this process, we're committed to the whole process, but we're dedicated to make it a success. And so that's what we're going to do together by working through this. If you'll hold on just a moment, we do have a smaller group at this session, and since we have a few minutes left on the time allotted, I'm going to turn off the recording so that we can save that, and then we'll do some questions that may be coming up. If I don't get to all of your questions,